God bless you all on this Monday afternoon. I was grateful to have another clergy conversation. And today I have a very special guest, the proud pastor of my home church. So he's actually my home church pastor as well. The proud pastor of the Greater Mount Olive Baptist Church, one of God's best preachers, best pastors, none other than Pastor Ray Douglas. So, Uncle, I thank you for coming on.
Chris,
And
Pastor Brown, thank you for having me, man. Uh, Again, I appreciate what you're doing as far as technology and uh, you know interviewing and talking to preachers. I've clicked in. I'm not a big social media person, but I've clicked in and I've seen some things. So I'm honored to be in this lineup of folk that you've had. And when people say that they're special. That can be interpreted in a couple of ways. And so, but I'm happy to be here, man. And again, as we were saying before we went on, it's because it's you, because I overbooked, and I realized after I talked to you that I was supposed to be traveling, and so I got here well in advance and set up. Dr. Burns Burrell has allowed me space to have this conversation, and so I got it all set up, and so I'm happy to be there. This is nice, man.
Well, now I can say I feel special because even though he did overbook, because I just found out this morning they had the midwinter board, but he was gracious to still have this interview with me. So I'm grateful that he still wanted to have this interview today. And so let's get started, because I know, like I said, you had midwinter board, so I don't want to take up too much time. But I definitely want to have a informal and thorough conversation.
They're going to be coming in just a minute, knocking on the door, and I'm like, wait.
So give us your background,
man. Listen, I guess the short version of me is that I'm a product of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma City schools, Oklahoma universities. Went to University of Oklahoma, communication, OBU. Proud, even more than proud, being a Sooner or even a Bison. I know you have those. Man, listen, that's why I pray for you, Chris. Man, you. You have an orange, but listen, I understand, because I'm a proud Douglas Trojan, and orange is a great color, not that bright kind of neon orange that they have.
But see, we get together because my mom is a Douglas Trojan, so we get together on that
point. And right, and then I don't know how you ventured differently, but your mother is a great person simply because she walked the halls. Douglas. So I'm proud Douglas Trojan, proud Oklahoma Sooner. I grew up in Oklahoma City at the Fairview Church. I'm a church boy all my life. Grew up at the Fairview Church. Reverend Dr. John A. Reed Jr. Is my pastor. He's the pastor that baptized me. He's the pastor that licensed me. He's the pastor that ordained me. And then actually he's the pastor that I work for first in full-time ministry. I served as his assistant for a number of years at the Fairview Church. And so I am a church board. I guess the ironic thing or funny thing about that is that I've been in church all my life. And as a boy, like most of us who grew up in church, I grew up in the era of wasn't nothing else happening. So we had Sunday school, and then morning worship, and I even now try to figure out how we got all that in, because you remember, growing in Mount Olive, you had the same thing. So you had Sunday school preview, because you had the Sunday news devotion, was dismissed for class, came back, had awards presentation, banner offering class, banner attendance class, had a Sunday school review. And then you had morning worship. I was like, were we there at 7? I don't know how we got all of that done.
Not to mention afternoon service.
Yeah. So, you had 11 o'clock service, and then at least 3 Sundays a month. At least 3. You had a 3 o'clock service somewhere. Now, certain churches had good 3 o'clock services. because they made, you remember the punch they would have?
Yep.
It was the sherbet,
Little
and
cookies and
the
stuff.
ginger ale, and the dinner mints and the nuts. So 3 o'clock service wasn't bad, other than the fact that wherever you were at 3 o'clock, you had to leave and go to BTU. Then
Now,
you had,
I can't say I remember that though. Can't say.
well, we had BTU, and it would be almost like the pastor would say, you know, if the 3 o'clock service went late, he would say, well, we're going to postpone BTU, and we'd be like, yeah. But evening service is on. So we were in church, and here's this: as a kid growing up in the 70s, I was teased in my neighborhood for being a church boy. And, you know, I knew how to fight, so that wasn't that bad. But here's what it was: where I was mad at the church, mad at my parents for making me go, not in the morning, but in the evening, because I missed Wonderful World of Disney. I missed the $6 Million Man. You go to school next day, they'd be playing $6 Million Man, and you try to play along. They said, man, that's not what happened. You didn't even watch it.
Oh,
and
man. So you got clowned, didn't you?
Man, and so I was like, man, when I get older, when I get the chance to not be in church, I ain't going to church. And here it is. My wife teases me is that because I'm at church probably 6-7 times every week. She makes fun of me and says, I know you went by the church because you can't come back in town without stopping at church before you stop. But as I was saying, man, I love the church. I grew up in the church, and so I have a love for the Lord's church.
Yes, sir.
And I don't think that you can really love the Lord,
yes, sir,
without loving his church.
Yes, sir.
That's you know, a lot of folks say that I got a relationship with God, but I don't want to be a part of the church. And of course, Chris, you know me, and I hope your audience will understand my sense of humor and my rawness. Saying you love the Lord without loving his church is like trying to love a woman without loving her kids. you don't. Absolutely. You can't, right? So the thing is that his thing is that you can't love her and mistreat them.
Absolutely.
And so my background is a church background, and so I love the Lord's church because I love the Lord. And as I was saying earlier, it's not always been a good relationship.
Right.
I've, a lot of folks talk about church hurt. I've been hurt in the church by church people. And then because I'm human, I've probably done some things that have hurt the church.
Right.
Not just people, but, we mess up sometimes in our behavior.
Absolutely.
As an ambassador of Christ hurts the kingdom that we represent.
Yes, sir.
And so I think that one of the things that I try to be now is very cognizant of my role as an ambassador, that I can't get expelled. His thing is the Lord sends us places. I don't want to be expelled. I was listening to NPR on the way down, and they were talking about, I believe it's the Syrian ambassador was expelled from countries. Like, we don't want you here. You have misrepresented where you came from. But that's I'm an Oklahoma boy. For the most part, man, I've lived in Oklahoma all my life, except for a brief period of time that I lived in Miami, Florida. I've been in the church all my life. Oddly enough, I surrendered to the ministry late in life. Mm-hmm. Lord called me to preach. I was a boy, and I didn't want to do it. And it frightened me. And I remember the advice that I got was that if you can keep running, do it.
Right.
And I was like, you ain't said nothing. And so I spent, man, listen, close to 20 years.
Wow.
Trying not to be who God called me to be. There was a time, Chris, man, that when I went to church, because that was an expectation,
Yes,
that
sir.
I made sure I left before an invitation.
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't want to get caught up
Yes, sir.
in the stuff. But you know, as the Lord calls you, you can't get away from it if He actually called you. And I remember finally it's like, man, I can't do this no more.
Right.
I was burdened with it. And I talked to Pastor Reed, and Pastor Reed said again, well, listen, if you can keep from running, you keep.
Right.
But I'm gonna meet you in whatever time period he gave me. And I came back and I was like, I can't do it. And he said, well, man, I'm going. So he put me up to preach.
Yes, sir.
This is how naive or ignorant I was about things of God. Here's what I thought: is all I had to do was preach one time, and and that God would leave me alone.
Yes, sir.
So I preached my first sermon fourth Sunday in June. So what, 91, 92, something like that. And I remember looking at Pastor Reed, because after I preached, he said that this man has dedicated the rest of his life. I was like, wait. you know how Pastor Reed.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
All on, and he's dedicated his life to. And I was like, no, this was a one-off, man. And so, unlike many of our contemporaries, not only did I run from the ministry, but I really had no desire to pastor.
Yes, sir.
And then that changed.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Lord, you have all kinds of plans, and the Lord says, well, yeah, no. And where I'm at now.
Yes,
You know, when I was called to the Mount Olive Church, I started preaching regularly at Mount Olive to be an assistance to A. Glenn Woodbury.
yes, sir.
A. Glenn Woodbury, of course, you know, was a friend of preachers.
Absolutely.
In during one of my hurt times,
Yes, sir.
Pastor Woodbury was the one that embraced me. Hey, Pastor Woodbury had a knack and a habit for embracing, healing, and restoring broken preachers.
Yes, sir.
It's a whole bunch of broken preachers that Pastor Woodbury. I mean, that was one of. I mean, he was probably one of the best preachers in the nation. I've been fortunate that every pastor that I've sat under in my life could preach.
Yes, sir.
You know, they could say it. But I thank God for these men beyond the pulpit.
Yes, sir.
One of the things I think is very, very important is how we handle our lives.
Yes, sir.
Preachers, not in the pulpit. As I was telling you earlier, I think it was Milton Prover told me that, you know, a good preacher is a dime a dozen. But
Yes,
how do you handle your life outside the pulpit? I heard Matt King Carter says is that you can't preach over your life. And so what I was fortunate enough to have was some godly men who were real men,
yes, sir.
not hypocritical men,
Yes, sir.
not putting on religious facades men, but real men who love God, who taught me how to live a life that is well-pleasing to God.
Yes, sir.
Not a perfect life, because we can't do that.
Right.
And so since we can't live a perfect life, it's no use putting on a facade of perfection. But what we learn and what we need to learn is that how you get up when you mess up. Yesterday, we've been preaching through the book of John's Gospel,
And so, I've been listening, so you've been doing good.
So we're in chapter 13. You know, actually, the first part of John is real good preaching.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, it's exciting. But man, once you get to that upper room discourse,
yes,
it starts getting real deep.
Yes, sir.
And but I was looking at that you know, the prediction of Peter's denial, right? And that Jesus is telling Peter, you know, Peter has his really is his pride, saying, I'll lay down my life for you. And Jesus,
Absolutely.
really, before this night is over, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Peter falls horribly. He fails horribly that same night. The other narrative says that Peter denies Christ, cussed some folk off, said, listen, man, I wasn't with him. His speech betrayed him, and he tried to talk differently because he didn't want to identify with Jesus. But here's what Jesus says in the Luke narrative of that is that you finna go through. Satan has asked for you to sift you like wheat. But when you have been converted, when listen, and the reason I know you're going to be converted, Peter, Jesus says that I prayed for you that your faith doesn't fail. And here, I think that's the most important thing for believers when we go through stuff, when we go through challenges, when we get knocked down, that a whole bunch of stuff may fail.
Yes, sir.
But because we are who we are in Christ, our faith cannot fail. And so when we are converted, not I said yesterday is that conversion is continual, not in the fact that we keep being saved. That initial conversion is what saves us, and so we're the Lord's children. But we keep growing. Absolutely. In the grace and we keep converting. And so what happens is that who I am today, I'll not be who I am tomorrow. And so, but even if it is, because God is a good God, then he gives me another opportunity, he gives me another chance. And so when I'm converted, when I come out of whatever mess I put myself in, or I find myself in, now I have a new message. When the test is over, I have a renewed testimony. And I think that's important for us as believers with the challenges that we face. And man, listen, guys like you and leading the church forward, guys like me, man, I got another 10, 12 years. Matter of fact, I got another I got to start praying and looking for a successor if I'm going to handle the Lord's business right. And if the Lord allows me to live and the agreement that I thought we made, he and I, then man, I got not a lot of time. And so it's guys like you that are going to stumble in this thing that got to take us. And so you got to know that, man, is that when you're saying it, man, you are probably one of the most energetic preachers. You preach for us. I mean, you love preaching. I know you love the people. But even with that, the people may not always love you. And as much as you love to preach, preaching may not always repay you. You may not get back from it in real time what you put into it.
Wow.
But what you have to understand is that God has you, and God knows what the end is. And sometimes it's at the end of the road, at the finish line, and what you're gonna go through. It really didn't matter what you went through. You know, I was coming, you know, because I was frightened of the weather because we had ice last week. When I was young, man, weather didn't bother me, right? So,
but now it does.
If it says it's going to have precipitation and it's going to be below freezing, I'm changing plans. I definitely ain't going to be in Valiant. You know how far Valiant is from Oklahoma City?
I think it's like what, 3.5, almost like
it's closer to go to Dallas.
Oh yeah, well yeah.
And so what I'm saying though is that for people like you, I think that message is that you're young and you have all of this in front of you, and really the future of the church is on your generation's shoulders.
Right.
Fact of the matter is, for the most part, people my age and older have done the most. We're not going to get that much better. I keep going to conferences. I keep wanting to learn as much as I can, but man, I'm not going to get that much better.
So then, so with that, then, how do you see, as we talk about the changing of the guards from, because I can be honest, your generation, whether it's you, I love Pastor Jeff Mitchell, that y'all's generation, Uncle Ricky, y'all's generation, my pastor, my pastor in the ministry, E.W. Bryant, y'all's generation will one day, have to take
Sit down.
stage left. And then so how do you see the church then, in a sense, moving forward, or how do you see the church passing the baton, and do you think our generation is ready for the baton?
Well, here's the thing: is that ready or not? I mean, no. I mean, here's the thing: is that ready or not, you're gonna have it, and the church has to go forward.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's those folk you name, some of my contemporaries that are literally right now giants. Pastor Mitchell has been at the top of the church 30 years.
Yep.
Right, Pastor Mitchell is one of the longest tenured pastors in Oklahoma City. Of course, after John Reed, 60 years, everybody is a drop down. But I think Pastor John Reed has been there 60 years. But here's what John Reed has done, and this is here's what Fabiu's done, and the reason Fabiu remains a leading church in our state and our nation. Again, I grew up there, so I know it. St. John has some of the same sense. Is when John Dove Provo, I'm talking names from way back, but when John Dove Provo left Fairview Church, I think this was in the 20s or 30s, went up to New Hope, where another one of our contemporaries, awesome pastor, E. Dennis Tyson, pastors now, grew up in New Hope and pastors New Hope now. Doing I mean, have you seen their new campus?
I've seen from the outside. I
Yeah.
haven't been a chance to go
I'm
inside.
just every time I
It's
talk to
beautiful.
Tyson, I said, man, I'm just so excited, man. This is one church, two locations. I love it. But what Fabu did, and this is to answer your question, what Fabu did was when Fairley came, Reverend Dr. S.S. Fairley served at church, grew the church, was a giant. I remember him. I as a boy, we as royal ambassadors, we used to have to go recite the royal ambassador pledge to him, and I remember him sitting in his parsonage smoking old cigars and and leather house shoes, and he would applaud us. But in 1963, he, not planning to die or get sick or anything, called someone to help him. And here's what happened. John Reed was able to walk behind him and then walk beside him. And then as Dr. Fairley declined, John Reed was able to take the lead. Right. And so it was a succession. Here's the importance of it, is that John Reed was able to feed the sheep and Dr. Fairley was able to fight the wolves.
Mm.
And so the transition was smooth.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Reed says that one day they were sitting in, and this is how smooth it was. They were sitting in the office and the phone rang. Dr. Fairley said, "Are you going to answer your phone?"
Wow.
It's the same thing happened at St. John with Johnson and then W.K. Jackson and now Jemison, right? And so it was a smooth transition. And if I think optimally, churches sometimes get it right when a church calls somebody, but often a church that know how to call a pastor got too much experience in calling a pastor, right? And so I think optimally succession planning, that person comes in, and so I think that's how the next generation gets ready.
Right.
Not only at that church, right? That's the section planning, but next generation gets ready by when you are a young preacher, you're not learning nothing from your contemporaries.
Wow.
So when you're a young preacher, the best thing to do is to be able to be with old preachers.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
you have nothing to add to the conversation most of the time.
No.
right? Just I remember, and one of the things that I'm thankful for is that I got to go get water and ice.
Yes, sir.
I got to sit in the room. I got to hear the conversation because of the people who John Reed knew, because of the people who Adrian Woodbury knew. I got to sit in the room and hear stuff that helped me now. I heard stuff then that helps me now.
Yes,
And
sir.
they weren't my peers. We weren't friends. I was there to get the ice.
Yes, sir.
Whatever menial thing that a lot of my contemporaries thought was degrading and demeaning. Like, boy, go get them bags. And I remember sometimes, man, I'll share this, and I don't know if I should share it on national, but I remember one time, man, we went to the Congress, and we dropped the drop pass off at the Omni, and we went to the Belleville Motor Inn. But here's the thing: is that all of those experiences of carrying the bag, getting the water, going to get the ice, driving, all of those experiences. Man, I learned so much from those guys, and I think that. So, how do you to answer your question? How your generation gets ready? Even though you are a pastor, you're a senior pastor, you're doing a great job. You have pastoral experience. This is what your third church.
Second church.
Second church. So yeah, pastoral experience, man. I know you're doing a great work there, man. I saw you did like the Martin Luther King thing.
Yes,
And I mean, listen, I ain't even on social media that much, but then I saw you were like on some radio show there.
yes, sir.
Somebody was, and so I mean, you're doing great work. But here it is that how you continue it is that you connect. And I mean, you always have. One of the things that I've admired about you was that you came around and it would at least listen to us old guys. I mean, many times you come and just sat in my office and we've talked, and I appreciate that because that's how you learn. I remember doing that myself, right?
Yes, sir.
Just sitting down and listening. And if you will sit and listen, and so I have all of these guys. Some of them have gone on to be with the Lord that have really shaped my ministry, not just my preaching ministry, right? So John Reed, again, I grew up listening to his preaching, great preacher, Pastor Woodbury, awesome preacher, but actually my homiletical hero is not either one of those. My homiletical hero, believe it or not, well, I guess it's easy to believe, it's Ralph West.
Oh,
I heard Ralph West preach Colossians chapter 3. West used to preach for W.B. Parker in Oklahoma City. He used to be at the 11 St. James and Spencer. And he preached, what do we preach? Him we preach. Warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom that we may present perfect in Christ Jesus. And I had never heard exposition like that in my whole life. I didn't know what it was.
right.
I mean, I never knew what exposition was. I mean, the thing is that Dr. Reed would do expository, topical, textual. I mean, he just preached and led us to. I mean, we knew we knew the word, but I'd never heard that. But here's these other guys who some of them wouldn't be considered great preachers. Bernard Smith, Wade Dawson, unknown pastors in the city that no one would have said these were great pulpiteers, but they were great men of God who invested in the church because they invested in young preachers. Dr. Eric Mays, C.C. Carroll, T.H. Hubbard, who loved the church. I wasn't members of their church, right? But they invested in the church because they invested in young preachers. And the reason they invested in a young preacher is because I was being faithful to my pastor.
Yes, sir.
I was there with him. So at 3 o'clock, back then, if pastor went somewhere at 3 o'clock, it wasn't a question of whether or not you were going. The question was how. Were you going on the church bus? Were you driving him? I mean, you were going to be there.
Absolutely.
And so wherever the pastor was, you was going to be. And because we were there, other pastors invested in us. Man, listen, I preach places, got an invitation to preach, not because I could preach. They ain't never heard me preach. I remember a man told me, he says, listen, I like the way you faithful to your pastor. Come preach for me. And yes, I got engagements and revivals and stuff like that as a young preacher, only because I was carrying water, packing Bibles, sometimes having to drive my pastor. And I think, again, to answer your question, how you get ready is to make sure you are around someone that has some experience that you can learn from, not only their successes, but you can learn from their mistakes.
Yes, sir.
Church I grew up in, of course, Fairview Church, we've been talking about that. There's a deacon there. He's still there. He used to be president of the usher board. His name is Donnell Forshee. And Donnell Forshee, I don't know if you know Donnell, but Donnell is a great deacon, a great man in church. But Donnell told me one time, he was talking about his kids. He says, man, I don't want my sons to make the same mistakes I made. I want them to make their own mistakes. And I laughed at it. But the truth is, we all gonna make mistakes.
Yes, sir.
But if I make mistakes on level 3, you can start making your mistakes on level 5.
Right. Right.
And you should be making level 3 mistakes too.
Absolutely. Well, I love the way you broke that down, because I think that's very important, especially as a young preacher. Now, I'll be honest. There were times as a young preacher, it was tough because, you were carrying water, carrying Bibles, and I didn't mind doing it, but then it was on the same time, and I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now why the Lord put me in those seasons of just wait, grow. And I had a conversation with Uncle Ricky one day, and because we talk all the time, but he told me something that I didn't really appreciate then, but I appreciate now. He said, just be patient. He said, the preaching will come, but he was telling me, grow, develop, learn who I am. And I think now, of course, we all still in that process, but it has helped. And I think as well that it's important that sometimes you do have to really understand, as a preacher and in ministry, patience really is more of a blessing than what we realize.
It is a definite blessing. Pastor in Oklahoma City, when I was the assistant to the pastor at the Fairview Church. And he was a pastor, had I won't call his name, but it had a thriving ministry. He was pastoring, and on the surface, everything. All of the things that accompany a good ministry. But he told me, he says, man, I would trade with you to be able to sit and learn.
Wow.
Another pastor said that too. He said, I didn't get that opportunity. I wish I would have had somebody to curb my enthusiasm, to tamper me.
Yes, sir.
One of the most important things I think for a preacher is to sit under somebody and learn.
Yes, sir.
I see a lot of young preachers just hopping from place to place to place to place to place, trying to find that next. But God elevates, and here's what God does. God blesses faithfulness.
Yes, sir.
God blesses faithfulness. God blesses effort.
Yes, sir.
And so, if you try and you're faithful in doing what the Lord say you do, He'll bless it. God never has made us responsible for any results. If you go up to the mountain with the sacrifice, the Lord will provide, right? But Absolutely. You have to go.
But you said it, effort, and I think that's something else that I think that's important is effort. And not just, as you say, not just when you get your opportunity to preach, but your effort, as you say, as you all taught us, Sunday school, Bible study, when your pastor's preaching somewhere, revivals, being there with your pastor, or just going around hearing different preachers. It's, as you say, you do have to be that a flexible.
Yeah. How are you involved in the life of the church?
Absolutely.
I remember telling an associate minister, he was really disappointed because he didn't get opportunities, and I was like, if you had opportunity, you wouldn't know what to do with it because you've never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know what happened to the 3:00 service? You've never been one. How do you know? I mean, so you got people who said that the Lord called them to ministry who don't go to Bible study, who don't go to prayer meeting. And the thing is that when I was a young preacher, it was just an expectation that you was at the church because the church was whatever was going on.
Right.
I mean, and you would just get put in to fill in the position. Matter of fact, not only this, when I was a social minister at the Fairview Church, the expectation was that even if you went somewhere else to preach that Sunday, if it was in town, you showed up for Sunday school at Fairview, and then when you finished, you came back to give your report.
Oh, wow.
Wait. That's because, and you ask permission, right?
Yes,
so, the thing is that people say, well, will you come preach for me? It's like, I asked my pastor. So he won't mind. I was like, he might not. But I gotta, and I didn't, a couple of times I'm gonna tell you this. Sometimes I didn't like pastoral authority. Mm-hmm. Right. But I'll tell you this. When I was a candidate for a church, I was in Mount Olive at this point. I was a candidate for a church. I was at a candidate for the church because Pastor Woodbury and Roy Johnson, they were together. Something came up. They called, Pastor Woodbury called a church. His secretary called me, said, call him. I'm like, well, I could probably, he could have just called me, but that's not how it worked. So I called Pastor Woodbury, and they said, he and Roy said, man, we want you to come and candidate for this church. And I went, I preached for them several times. Pastor Woodbury called me in his office, and he says, what they doing down there? And I told him, and I said, he says, well, you tell them you ain't going back. Because I don't, they taking too long. I don't like churches try to take advantage of preachers. You tell them that you're not going back. And I said, well, I remember I already told them that I would preach for them Easter Sunday. He said, okay, you preach for them Easter, but you tell them that you're no longer a candidate.
Wow.
And I'm like, he ain't the boss of me. But you know what I told him? I'm no longer a candidate.
Yes, sir.
Right? Listen, there were no promise. There's nothing. He was like, you don't be a candidate there. I'm going to make you my assistant here. None of that stuff was on the table. He just said, this is what you do. And you did it. When I was at the Fairview Church, the expectations, what they had, John Reed would say, this is what you're going to do. And you did it. And again, even if you went out preaching, you came back you would have to. And one another thing that I really thank God for is those saints at the Fairview Church when I was a young person is that, you know how church folk encourage young preachers and they tell you you're doing a good job and you ain't. I go preach. Man, listen, I am real full of myself, Chris. At this point, I go preach. Man, I'm a new preacher, right? I just started preaching, and I have a preaching engagement on a first Sunday morning.
All right.
I mean, this is Back Baptist Church. This first Sunday morning.
Yeah, pastors normally don't give it, especially not to an associate on the first Sunday.
I go preach, and I do my best. And I knew something was wrong because my mother went with me. And my mama said, listen, I'm going to tell you this. Good meat will make its own gravy.
Oh, wow.
I was like, that's just my mama.
So you had a mama like mom, because my mom used to say something that I didn't appreciate then, but I appreciate it now.
I get back to the church, and I'm still, you dismiss your mama's remarks. I get back to the church, and this old man, Deacon Anderson Davis, Anderson Davis says, "Oh, so you've been out preaching, huh?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And I was getting ready to tell him what I preached and all of that. He reached out and grabbed my shirt collar and said, "Boy, you didn't even break your collar. You ain't done nothing," and walked away.
Oh, wow.
I was like, and so here's what I learned is that you appreciate people who are honest more so than you appreciate people who have blown smoke.
Yes, sir.
That you can't and I say this because a lot of times there are kind people at churches and they tell associates and young preachers to try to encourage them stuff, and it can let their head go up, and they don't preach 3 times and they think that they're on the same level as their pastor.
Wow. Wow. So,
And go ahead.
oh no, keep going because I got another question, but keep going. Finish.
Yeah, no, they believe that they're on that same level and they're not. And in the end, it will hurt them. But not only will it hurt them, it'll hurt your church, especially if the person has surface level gifts.
Wow.
Right. So what happens is that you can have no depth, no content, but if you got the voice, or you got the look, folk, people will go for that. I remember Pastor Woodbury telling me about this guy, and I won't, you know him. He gone on, but he said he was associate. He said I couldn't help him because he never was here. But because he had a gift, he could really sing. A church called him, and he messed that church up. That church still messed up.
Mm.
So and he gone on to be with the Lord.
So then when you look at preaching, then and I because you some questions I was going to ask, you already hit talking about growing up under Pop Reed and growing up under A. Glenn, but we will talk about that transition from Ferry to Mount Olive, but we'll get to that in a second. When you look at preaching, then from let's just say from when you were growing up to now, and then just your process and even what you hear, what are things that encourage you about preaching, and what are things that discourage you about preaching?
One of the most encouraging things about preaching is that people are preaching now what I call reckless abandon. Mm-hmm. Right? They are just saying it. People are not as caught up in style as they are in substance.
Absolutely.
A lot of preachers, when I grew up, there was a preacher look.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, and I saw that blown out of the water. The first time I ever heard Maurice Watson. Maurice Watson came because there was a preacher who was supposed to come for the citywide revival who looked like a preacher. I mean, I'm talking about the surface level. And he could preach too. He could say it. Wasn't no question about the fact that he had the gift. He could say it. But he wouldn't come because he had some other projects came or whatever it happened. He didn't make it. And so they called Maurice Watson. He was pastoring at the time in Omaha at Salem Church. And Maurice, I had never heard Maurice. I was disappointed that the preacher that I came to hear wasn't there. And Maurice came in, and he didn't look like a preacher because Maurice, I was like, man, they done brought this somebody on some call center floor. I mean, what I'm talking about, the stereotypical matching gators. Right. That wasn't Maurice Watson, right? So he came in a blazer, and listen, Maurice preached that narrative of Abraham and Isaac. This was in early 90s, over 30-some years ago. He talked about it's only a test. I mean, here's the thing is that good preaching like that lasts forever. Absolutely. His introduction was you remember the American broadcast system?
Yes.
Come on, and they tell you if this had been an actual emergency. Yep. Man, I mean, what I'm saying is that so it was so outstanding and so life-changing to hear how God uses someone to shape the word with reckless abandon.
Yes,
wasn't doing it the way other folk were doing it. He did it, and now people trying to be like him, right? And so that's the encouraging thing that I see a lot of young guys are preaching with reckless abandon. The discouraging thing that I see is that sometimes it's all about that preaching hour and not about the other aspects of ministry.
Yes, sir.
And so what you have are people, you have pastors who are preachers before they're pastors.
Mm.
And so what happens is that I can bring in a guest preacher. I can't bring in a guest pastor.
Wow. Say that again.
I
Let
can
me, let
bring
me
in a
hear that.
guest preacher, but I can't bring in a guest pastor. The
Wow.
relationship that God has placed with me and the people he placed me with,
Yes,
and
sir.
that's sacred.
Yes, sir.
There's no stand-in for a pastor.
Mm.
Matter of fact, listen, folks can get good preaching on the internet, but you can't get good pastoring.
Yes,
You
sir.
have to have that connection. You have to have that relationship, right? It's the heart that a pastor has for the folk, and that's how you know you're where you're supposed to be. Is that you have the heart for the people. That
Yes, sir.
that you're not a hireling. You're not a mercenary minister. That
Yes,
you
sir.
actually have a heart for the people. And when they hurt, you hurt. And that's the thing that I'm seeing, and just in the comments that I hear, that the adversarial relationship that sometimes folk have with their people that they are to pastor. You gotta like them, you gotta love them though, and you gotta be, I think, accessible and to be where they are. Right? Someone I remember who said it is that a good shepherd ought to smell like sheep.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a great book that chronicles that they smell like sheep. What a great book that I have that talks about that a pastor has to have those relationships, has to get down in the trenches, has to get down and dirty with the people that he serves, because as you say, is that how can you really be an effective pastor if you're not even if you're not even trying to get down there with the people that you want to follow you.
Yeah, and that's what it is. What the Bible says, and Jesus had compassion
Yes, sir.
on the people, and that's the pastoral aspect. And so again, to answer your question, it's encouraging because there's some good preaching. The discouraging is that sometimes there's a disconnect from the stage than the stuff that's behind the stage.
Yes, sir.
Right. And so, I don't ever want to just be on the stage. I want to feed the folk. I want folk to be well fed. I want them to appreciate the preaching. I want them to respond to the preaching. I want them to want to come back to hear some more. But it's what happens between Sundays.
Yes, sir.
Is, I think, and that's again that's the life of the church. People, your folk, and matter of fact, I would never do it, but you probably could put a video up. It's like, here's who preaches. I'm preaching through the Paul's epistles. It's like, well, let me just go put Ralph West up here. You ain't gonna get it better than that. And I'm gonna be at the hospital and pray with you. But what I'm just saying is that I think that there's a priority that has to be on preaching.
Right.
God sent us to preach, but then that you cannot neglect the pastoral aspect of it as a pastor.
Yes, sir.
And I think sometimes we miss that.
Yes, sir.
In the modern church.
So talk to us about just your transition from Fairview to Mount Olive, and then your elevation to the senior pastor role.
Of course, as I said, I grew up in the Fairview church. I left Fairview and I organized a church called New Century Church. And New Century, man, it was supposed to be New Century, cutting edge, right? this was right before the millennium change, and so this was what was this 99, and so we organized, man, and immediately grew exponentially. I mean, just like we were at the Y, Oklahoma City. So we're at the North Side Y on Britain, between Hefner and Britain,
Oh, wow.
Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yeah, man, I was doing Bible studies at that village library, man. I read everything Malthus had about planting the church. Peter, I believe is Wagner, planting churches. Man, I was like, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna plant the church. The church grew. We got a house to meet in. Couldn't get a building in Northwest Oklahoma City. Was meeting in a house. Man, things were going well. And then three things happened. Exponential growth, was baptizing folk. Pastor Teron Gaddis would open up the Greater Bethel Church, and I would go baptize folk at the Greater Bethel Church, and we were trying to reach folk who were unchurched. And so we would bring folk in, baptizing them. And so I'm having a house church, man, just like not my house, but a house. Well, maybe if I did it in my house, it would have been better. But I didn't have the hospitality to have it in my house. But we were at a house, and so I'm inviting the neighbors and say, "Man, we having church." And so one of the neighbors wasn't too pleased, and so the landlord that had let us have it changed his mind. All right, we're paying rent, and it was he became part of the church. That's the first part. He was like, well, neighbors are complaining of the noise or the potential noise that's going to be here and the parking that's here on Sunday. That's first thing. Second thing happened was a person that had become a part of the church. I mean, growing, they came and they got up, said they wanted to make a statement. You know, this is why I don't let people talk. People talk. They got up, said they want to make a statement. And I'm thinking, you know, something real positive. When he got up and said that he never wanted to be a part of a church plant and he was leaving, and if other people had good sense, they would too.
Oh, wow.
Third thing happened is I had written a pamphlet, a little booklet called Why Halloween is Not Innocent Fun.
Oh.
And so it was
That
Halloween.
was the demise.
I was Halloween and I taught that. And so the biggest family had just taken their children trick-or-treating. So anyway, didn't have a building, folk was leaving. So we started meeting at the Canon Church, Pastor Bruner.
Yes, sir.
I was at service and I was like, man, you know, I don't know. He said, well, you can just meet at my church at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever time before his Sunday school. And I was like, okay, great. It was Palm Sunday that we were supposed to start there. And so I'm there with about 22 people in the parking lot, and he ain't. And he ain't answered his phone. And he said he thought I was going to come get the key from him. And I said, I thought you was going to come open it up. But nonetheless, that it had like 22 people in the cold dark on Palm Sunday. And so then when I finally got the key and the alarm code on Easter Sunday, that 22 people had turned to about 12. And so we stayed there for a good while. And then the final thing, and how I ended up in Mount Olive, the final thing that happened was I was working full time for a company. And I was in management. And got a new boss, came in from New Mexico, and the new boss said to me that I hear that you're a minister. And I said, yes, I am. And she said, well, I wonder how that's going to work because you're going to be working Sundays, working a call center. I was like, And so I'm trying to figure it out. But this time it's dwindling. My deacon at my church, I had two deacons. And one of them, my deacon and my musician was my brother. He died. So I'm devastated. I got all of this stuff going on. I'm mad now at God again because he embarrassed me. He told me to go out here and organize this church. And in less than 5 years,
wow.
I mean, it went up and it wasn't what I imagined it to be. And so we did this 5 years. And so I'm having to work on Sundays. And so, I send people places. I'll say, this is where you go. I send my family to Mount Olive. They go over there. My daughter, my youngest daughter at the time, says, man, this is great. They had a great youth ministry, things going on. So they were going there. And I was working Sundays. I would come to Bible study on Wednesday sometimes. And so I was coming. I would be there, and when I could make it there on Sunday, Doc would do stuff like I'd be sitting in the back, and Doc was like, "Douglas, come up and pray." I mean, you know that back southeast corner, yeah, that's where I sat. So Doc would say stuff like that. So I lose my job. All right, so now I don't have to work on Sundays because I don't have to work anyway. And I was like, well, Lord, maybe you could have did this earlier. But you know, of course, I know Pastor Woodbury. Pastor Woodbury has always been kind to me, has always been cool with me. And so I remember one Wednesday, I had a conversation when I talked to him, and I said that I would like to become a member. And he says, okay, well, on Sunday, you join. And first Sunday in May, 2004, which is also my birthday, first Sunday in May, I joined the Greater Mount Olive Church by statement. Now, wait, you understand, you grew up in Mount Olive. I joined by statement. Pastor Woodbury let me talk. And he said, go ahead. I hope I don't regret this. So I joined church, and I'm just trying to do whatever, you know, and I told them, it's like, I'm here to do whatever he say do. Nothing more, nothing less. If he didn't tell me to do it, I'm not doing it. And so I did that around 2008, 2009. Doc started sending me on his engagements. He would say, I remember the first one that I really remember vividly is we're sitting Sunday morning and we're going to get ready to go somewhere. And he says, I sure don't want to go. And I'm thinking, well, if he ain't going, then I don't have to go. Great. It was out of town, so we're going to Muskogee.
Oh, Muskogee, okay.
So finally he says, Doug, you can't take a hint, can you? like, obviously not. So he sends me, and so I start going. He starts sending me on these 3 o'clock engagements, and then starts putting me up to preach more and more at Mount Olive. And then, of course, in 2011, called me and asked me to serve as his assistant, and I said, man, I'm honored to do it. And I talked to the board, and I became his assistant. And I was just happy to do whatever I can to serve him because I loved him. And of course, this was in like June or July. And I knew Pastor was sick, but he had been sick before, and he got better before. And so I remember the very last conversation, in-depth conversation we had. I was driving the same road, Indian Nation Turnpike. I was going to Marshall, Texas. And so I crossed over on the other side of Paris, and I saw the Blossom sign. You know, that's where he's from. But then there's a city right on the border called Arthur City, Texas. And so I called him because I needed to get permission for the Bible study series that I was getting ready to start the 1st of September. This is late August. And I remember saying, man, I didn't know that they named a city for you down here. And he laughed. And I was getting ready to do a series. I wanted to do a series on 23rd Psalms. And so, of course, I'm get permission. You don't teach anything in somebody's church that they have not signed off on and approved. I grew up at the Fairview Church. I know how I know. Here's the thing: is that before I knew how to be a pastor, I knew how to be an associate.
Absolutely.
Right? I was well taught that. So I called and I asked him, and here's what he said. I said, I want to do the 23rd Psalm, and he said, yeah, they're gonna need that. And you wouldn't have think anything of it in real time, but it became haunting because I started the series on the 23rd Psalms at the beginning of September, and then on September the 10th, the Lord took it.
Wow.
And that series is what that church needed. That the Lord is my shepherd. I remember the Pastor Woodbury passing that Saturday morning. We leave the hospital. There was a funeral. The Selman, when the Selman brothers had passed, of course, his sister was a member of our church, and so I had to leave that church, and I'm making phone calls to the Sons of Mount Olive and to other preachers that had a great relationship with Pastor Woodbury, and I got to go get ready to go to this funeral. It's a long funeral. I get back from the funeral. I get back, and what I had planned to preach that Sunday was not preachable because we just lost our pastor.
And I remember exactly what you preached that next day because I remember pastor's chair was draped in black. It was a purple and white ribbon on top of it, and you preached Romans 8:28. And
Yeah,
church was packed that day. That's one of the most probably emotional church services I've ever been a part of because it was sombering. It was sad, but by the grace of God, we pulled through that day. But it was everybody kept looking at the chair.
yeah. It was, man. And so yeah, that Romans 8:28, everything's gonna be all right.
Yep.
And it man, and here's the thing is that I'm gonna tear up. But that began this process. But here's the thing, man. I didn't really get a chance to grieve
Right.
Doc's death.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, mind you, I'm working full time. I work for a laboratory company, and I'm doing 60 hours or more a week, and so I got to cheat them on Wednesdays. I go in, I put on my headset like I'm on a conference call. My boss will be like, I'm missing the call. It's like, no, no. So I got to cheat them on Wednesdays to get ready for Wednesday night. Then I got to cheat my family because I got to finish. And so, man, I burned the candle on both ends from September all the way through December. And then, of course, the process, right? I wasn't a candidate. I wasn't even applying. My only concern was I hope we get a pastor that can preach, that I can sit under. And so the deadline passed for applicants, and they was like, well, where's yours? And I was like, I didn't know I needed to turn one in. So I turned one in. Then there's some contention. Uh, you know, I might as well, everybody knew it. There was a petition started by some people, some of them still there, to stop me from preaching. And I'm like, okay. And so I remember they came and said, well, maybe after next week you can. And I was like, well, I don't have to wait. Yeah, I mean, I really need a break. So thank you. But and some things happened, and I knew that this is what the Lord wanted me to be because I love them, even in spite of some stuff. That I love the people, and it's been a love affair. And so in March of 2012, they had the election, the vote to call, and they called me, and I was installed in May, and trying to do what the Lord have us to do from this forth on. But one of the things is that I think, and again, that's why I think succession is a great thing, is that everybody knows what's next. The issue, in retrospect, I didn't know what was going on in, but the issue is that there was an older segment of leaders that said we don't need to even have a search committee. We got the person. And there was a younger segment that says, no, y'all can't just railroad this through. And so had contention, but Lord blessed, and I believe His will was done, and we're still on the hill. And
Absolutely.
the
Doing a great job.
Lord's still blessing. Here's the thing: is that the other thing, man, a great church is not because there's a great pastor. Great churches make great pastors. There are pastors who are serving in literal obscurity. Great preachers, great pastors.
And so you, I mean, you get to Mount Olive, and those of us who have been born, raised in Mount Olive, love Mount Olive to pieces. But for you to replace a legend,
Man.
and in replacing a legend, but also having to establish your own, find your own voice, because there's some pastors I know who are listening who have had to be in that role of having, and I've had other conversations with those who have had to step in after and had to replace a legend.
You know what I did immediately after I was called to pastor Greater Mount Olive Church? I called Brian Carter at Concord in Dallas. And I asked Brian Carter, how do you follow a legend?
Yes, sir.
Carter gave me sage advice. And that's what it is. He says, man, listen, honor his legacy and be yourself.
Yes, sir.
And listen, that's the only way you can do it. You can't be him. All right. You honor his legacy, and then you be yourself. And eventually, the people will get to know you. They will accept you, and some of them will even start loving you. I'm talking about the folk that didn't at first.
Yes, sir.
Your detractors will get to know you. But here's the thing, and I'm saying this, and I don't want it to come off wrong, but my advice to young preachers, I had a preacher ask me about when you have problems in the church with some folk, how do you do it? And here's what you do. You love them and outlive them on both levels. You love them and you be who God called you to be. Don't ever get down on their level. Don't do tit for tat when people do things to get a rise out of you, but don't get down. Outlive them in that sense. Then love them, and if you do their home going well, their family will appreciate you.
Right. So then let me ask a couple more, because like I said, Unc's been very gracious, but I know I got to let him go. Even though I don't want to, I got to let him go in a couple minutes.
Yeah, man, they're looking at me, man. They're finna,
yeah, I got
Dixie.
I got to let you go in a couple minutes. So just quickly, just talk to us about reading books as a preacher, building your library, and how to transition, and the importance of transitioning a church from where we were maybe just 10 years ago. Like we talked about transitioning church from where we were to where we are now, especially in the midst of COVID, before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID.
Well, real quick, one is that a preacher's best friend is his library. John Reed told me as a young preacher, make friends with books. They will never leave you or forsake you.
You never lied about that.
You read, you discover stuff. Just read. Dr. M.A. Carey started my library for me. And then names I mentioned, Dr. C.C. Carroll recommended and gave books, Dr. Eric Mays. But grab books and read. And then, just not necessarily reading to get prepared to preach, but just read to prepare yourself for this world that you live in. And then for the church as it's transitioning, you have to know the times and what must be done. Is the men of Issachar. They knew what Israel needed to do. And so what happens is that even, brother preacher, if that's not who you are, find somebody that's who it is, right? Dr. Fairley never drove, but Fairview you had a church bus. So what you have to do is that know that it is a digital age. And if you don't have a digital footprint, you have left yourself in obscurity and you're not being a good steward of what the Lord has entrusted to you. And so all of this stuff like you're doing on Facebook, on the YouTube channels, the live stream. Mount Olive, we started live streaming in 2011, and I hated live stream because it let people not come to church. But when pandemic hit, we didn't miss a beat. They shut stuff down. And then next Wednesday, I was on Facebook Live. I've never been on Facebook Live, but I did my midweek Bible study on Facebook Live. Had never heard of Zoom, but learned how to do Zoom and learned how to do all of those things. And you have to, even though you were uncomfortable in it, you didn't want to do it, you had to do it because you have to serve the present age. And so whether it's digital delivery of content, thing that blew me away during the pandemic is there's a woman that was listening to our service in Plano, Texas, came up to be baptized.
Wow.
And I used to didn't think that was
wow.
I gotta go, but I'll tell you this: Freddie Haynes used to have on his site. Freddie Haynes is probably one of the most innovative people in ministry. But Freddie Haynes had on his website years ago how to become a virtual member. And I looked at that and I said, Dr. Freddie Haynes has lost his mind. Ain't no such thing as virtual membership.
Well, listen, everybody, thank you. Before we go on, is there anything else on your heart? Let people know about Mount Olive. Anything else on your heart that you want to share, and share anything about Mount Olive so they know, and then we're going to get you out of here.
Well, thank you, man. We're here, 1020 Northeast 42nd Street. If you're in the Oklahoma City area, come by up on the hill, Church on the Move, committed to the cause of Christ. Hashtag meet me at the mount. At least I got that right.
They did. Listen, God bless you all. Thank you all. We about to get out of here, but continue to like, comment, and share. We look forward to seeing you next time.
All right.